Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020, and we are the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee today. We currently are joined by Council Members Jeremiah Ellison and Council Member Steve Fletcher. We are hoping to be joined by one other council member so we can have quorum, but in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and begin some of our items here on the agenda, and then we'll officially adopt and approve once we reach quorum. So our agenda today has 7 items, and I'll just go ahead and read through those. Item number 1 is our public comment period, which is typically a simple receive and file. Then we have a couple of items under consent. Item number 2 under consent is a contract amendment with Corner House, an interagency child abuse evaluation center for forensic interview services. Item number 3 is authorizing a contract with Dakota County Technical College for emergency, non-emergency vehicle training for police officers. Item number 4 is authorizing an extension to a contract amendment with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office for some pretrial detention fees. Item number 5, we're actually going to pull for a motion later once we have quorum, and that is a mutual non-disclosure agreement with the University of Pennsylvania Law School, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and the Hennepin Emergency Medical Services for participating in a Minneapolis Sentinel event review program. Item number 6 is authorizing a release of liability, hold harmless, and defense, and indemnification agreement with Hennepin County for maintenance responsibilities of the workforce director system. And then our 7th item is a discussion and a presentation on the MPD staffing and efficiency study request for proposals that might be coming up here soon. So those are the items on our agenda. So we shall start with public comment. So if there's anybody here that's participating with us today to share comment or input on any items related to public safety or emergency management, this would be the time to come up and share your thoughts. Sounds like we have one valiant testifier. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Chuck Turchik. I live in South Minneapolis. This is a follow-up, or maybe it's a non-follow-up. 2.5 years ago, that's 30 months ago, Justine Damon Ruszczyk was killed. Then on June 7th, 2019, that's about 7 months ago, at the sentencing of Muhammad Noor for the killing, Judge Catherine Quaintance related the questions the jurors had regarding that entire situation. I sent you those questions. And after repeating what she had heard from the jurors, she said, and I quote, "A large amount of taxpayer dollars will go to Australia, but Minneapolis residents await the promised transformation, and the questions of the jurors remain unanswered. What has changed? What will change so this does not happen again? How does the department address officer safety without jeopardizing public safety? The jurors and the people of Minneapolis need and deserve answers," unquote. That was 229 days ago. And I checked with someone who has been working with the community group that arose in Miss Ruszczyk's neighborhood after the shooting, and I asked if they had received any answers. The reply was, and I quote, "To my knowledge, there has been no comprehensive report from the city or county attorney's office on the policy failures from this incident. We frequently reiterate to the city council and police department our desire for such a report to be generated, as we believe this is the only way to achieve the transformational change Judge Quaintance and Justine's family spoke of," unquote. So that group hasn't heard any answers. I haven't heard any answers. Have you?
Thank you. If we have any other folks ready to share their comments, please come on up. Welcome.
Good morning, Dave Bicking, South Minneapolis also. I sent you on behalf of Communities United Against Police Brutality, sent you a letter yesterday, and we passed that out today, so I won't repeat most of what's in there. We're interested, very interested in the staffing and efficiency study. We've been talking about this ourselves during the budget process. A big concern is to make sure that the scope of this study is broad enough to talk about many different areas where there could be greater efficiency in the police budget. I think, the talk has been about more officers. In reality, I think it's very possible the same work could be done with fewer, or the work could be directed towards those areas where it ought to be directed instead of mental health crises or rousting the homeless. CUAPB is very interested in participating with this study. I hope it will be set up in such a way that public members of the public can participate. And we also want to see the budget made more transparent. At this point, as I had said during the budget process, the Minneapolis Police Department budget online and anywhere I can find any information is broken down into about 5 categories, and that's it. We have no idea of transfers of funds from, for instance, the self-insurance. So we want to follow up with that. Also, I'm very glad to hear that item number 5 is being removed for discussion. The non-disclosure agreement doesn't seem like the first place to start on a contract that we haven't heard anything about in public. I've searched for any information on this, can't find it. We don't know what kind of Sentinel events are being talked about. I hope we'll find out much more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public? Okay, sounds like we have completed this portion of the agenda. And so we will now move into the discussion item, which is a presentation or a status update from our staff on the MPD staffing and efficiency study. And if I can please have our city coordinator, Mark Ruff, please lead the way. I will note before Mark begins that our offices did receive the Communities United Against Police Brutality letter with the several points that this group would like us to take into consideration as we put together this RFP. And I know that my office and my staff are working on it, and so the point of contact will be Dylan, and he's been directed to reach out to the group to follow up. And I see that some of the points that are being brought up in this letter are already things we will be incorporating into our study. So we look forward to refining those and bringing more togetherness between those two items. So without further ado, Mr. Ruff.
Chair Cano, members of the committee, Mark Ruff, interim city coordinator. On behalf of other staff here today, including Renee Youngs, who's within the city coordinator's office, who will be our primary researcher from city coordinator's office, Deputy Chief Waite and Robin McPherson from Minneapolis Police Department, want to present an overall scope and goal set of goals for the staffing and efficiency study. Just a reminder for those not familiar with how this study originated, it was requested by the City Council during the budget process through a staff direction. This is in some ways a follow-up to work that had already been undertaken in 2019 through the 911 MPD Workgroup. Also, Deputy Chief Waite very involved in that group's recommendation, which talked about call prioritization through 911 as well as options for reducing sworn officers' workload by having other parts of the enterprise undertake some of the work that sworn officers undertake. That work will continue. This is a separate and distinct effort pursuant to the staff direction. It is also a study. I was talking with Chief Arredondo yesterday, at least to his knowledge, a study like this has not been done in the city of Minneapolis, at least in the last several decades. So this is a new experience for us, but certainly not something that's new for other police departments around the country. There are very good models that the staff has reviewed already and will continue to review for major metropolitan areas on how they undertake staffing studies. I will say, going into this study, it is not going to be a formulaic approach, meaning that we don't expect the results to be an exact number of different parts of MPD and how they should be staffed. That being said, there will be metrics associated with the study, and we have in front of you 6 goals, which will incorporate some of those metrics. First and foremost, I want to say that this study is the entire part of Minneapolis Police Department will be reviewed, not just, for example, patrol and investigations, which are obviously a significant part of the employment within MPD, but we will be looking across all divisions of MPD. We're going to try to work through that effort in relationship to workload-based analysis. And workload can be a number of factors. Many of you have pointed that out in previous discussions. It can be 911 calls, it can be crime statistics, it can be population, it can be types of establishments that we have that are heavier demand for public safety. It can be number of visitors and types of events that we have in terms of entertainment in Minneapolis as well. And so we will be narrowing that focus through the study goals, but again, it's going to be a workload-based analysis, so it's not just about today, it's also what factors do we go looking at in the future, so we don't have to do one of these analyses every 2 or 3 years, but lean into a factual-based analysis of staffing. We will certainly spend time talking about patrol, in particular shifts in scheduling, as I know that is an area of discussion for both staff and for elected officials. The third area is to look at the business processes within MPD and whether and this is the efficiency side of it, as to whether other parts of the enterprise can equally serve as well the MPD needs at a lower cost or with greater public outreach. The use of overtime certainly will be a factor, and that is in any public safety. We've undertaken that in the fire department, for example. What's the right balance between some overtime to have flexibility, but not too much that we are either costing the enterprise too much or putting too much stress on officers as well. The use of sworn versus civilian personnel for different positions has been a discussion topic in past budgets here in Minneapolis and will also be one moving forward. And then the last specific topic is 1-person versus 2-person patrol cars. So those are the 6 general areas. How these goals then move forward is the study will be undertaken by an outside consultant. As many of you are aware, the City of St. Paul recently released their own staffing study that was done internally by an expert within the St. Paul PD. We do anticipate using a national expert for this who has done these types of studies previously. Renee and the police department, and together with a variety of folks within the enterprise, will be using the goals then to write a scope of work for the request for proposals, the RFP, which will be issued, we anticipate, in February of this year, reviewing responses, selecting a vendor, and then moving forward with the work through 2020. And we anticipate reporting out of the results later this year. So with that, be happy to answer any questions, welcome feedback. We're not asking for any particular action today of this committee, more of just, are we headed in the right direction? Are there scopes of work that we are missing? Are there some that you would like to de-emphasize and maybe emphasize others? That's the feedback that would very much help us as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. I did want to take a moment to acknowledge Councilmember Andrea Jenkins, who has joined us at the committee level, which is now at the quorum level. And we have a question or comment from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. I think it's a very important study, and I'm glad to see it moving forward. I think there are a couple of policy questions that have been raised by other work happening in parallel to this that I just want to make sure are addressed, because I think as we consider those questions over the course of the year, this is an opportunity for us to look at those. So the two things I'm thinking of specifically are the 911 Workgroup Study, which is referenced in this, but I want to make sure that as we're thinking about who's doing mental health response and are there things that might get reassigned, that we have a picture of what impact that has on staffing levels and on demand, so that we can consider that. I think the other body of work that's happening in parallel is the audit committee's look at off-duty, which is not referenced in overtime, but I think it's actually an important thing for us to understand, particularly if there were changes to off-duty policy that reduced the availability of off-duty officers. What impact would that have on staffing needs? Because I actually think that might lead to an increased need downtown, for example, if we cleared out all the off-duty officers at bar time. And so I think understanding the policy implications, both that might lead to increased demand and that might lead to decreased demand, are going to be very important for us as we're considering policy moving forward. But that being said, I'm really appreciative of the spirit in which everybody's embracing this study. I think it's important data for all of us to have, and I think there's a real opportunity for us to make smarter investments moving forward. So thank you for this, and I hope we can incorporate those policy areas that are already supported and other work happening in other committees as we move forward.
Councilmember Ellison.
I'll just jump in to say that I think that I appreciate the presentation and that I think this is headed in the right direction. And so I just wanted to let that be known and thank you all for the work. And again, this is I think this is for us to consider how we can make the best investments and especially how we deliver those things to the public. How do we make sure that we're using tax dollars to the best of our ability? How do we make sure that we're getting data out in a way that is on time, in a way that is responsive and accountable to the city, our constituents, the community? I think those are things that we want to make sure that we're highlighting and consider. So thank you all for jumping into this, and thank you for this update.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is for Mr. Ruff. Do we have any idea of consultants that are able to do this kind of study, or are they local or national?
Chair Cano, Council Vice President Jenkins, we do have a list based on those other studies from major metropolitan areas of who is in the market and has experience for this type of work. We certainly always love to have local firms working either as a primary or as a sub-consultant for any of our requests for proposals for services, and we'll do our best to get the word out so that those firms and groups can participate. But I think as with any request for proposal process, we're always pleasantly surprised with the results, and I anticipate that this will be the case as well. This will certainly be, and because I think as has been mentioned, the mayor's office, Minneapolis Police Department, the council is all looking at this study as something that is a serious guide for the future actions and not just something that we have to do to move on to a next step. That will bring a level of attention from respondents who will understand that this will be a benchmark that they can use in other places as well. So I'm excited about the opportunity.
Has the request been developed yet, or is that in process?
Chair Cano, Council Vice President Jenkins, this is an important step, this discussion today, to then for Renee together with MPD staff to actually formulate the document for the request for proposals, and we would hope that that is done in the next few weeks.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought of one more question. I'll just note on the timeline, that there is an importance to the difference between summer and fall, and then how we define fall in terms of the impact that this has on our ability to budget according to the data that we get. And so with the 911 work group last year, I regretted not being a little more aggressive about putting a deadline on that so that we could get that information in time to act on it. Because we really didn't last year. So I would encourage us, as we think about a timeline and a deadline, I know we have to balance work takes time, and we have to make sure that we do this thoughtfully and thoroughly. But in a perfect world, we would get this in time for it to inform the mayor's budget proposal, and at the very least, we would get it in early fall so that we have time to consider the council's work in relationship to the mayor's proposed budget in time to get public feedback on it and to really work with stakeholders to make changes that reflect what we learn here. So I would encourage a deadline that's on the early side of fall or into summer if it's possible.
Chair Cano, if I can, Councilmember Fletcher, appreciate the comments. Again, we'll be looking to the respondents to let us know what their pace of work would be, and an element of how quickly they can get it done will certainly be a factor in whom we select. I would also say that there is the possibility that the results come out in pieces too, so that the study doesn't all have to be done before any of those benchmarks that you've laid out, but that's yet to be determined. We do not have a specific timeline that we are laying out, just because, brutally honest, right? We don't really want to overpromise and underdeliver. I think we do all want the best product possible. So we will certainly do our best to pay attention to those timeframes you've laid out.
Councilmember Ellison.
Oh, one last thing, just on that note, if it turns out that the study does kind of have to come out in chunks or pieces, I think we'd want to revisit maybe the priorities, what we're emphasizing, what information we want, in what order, if that's the case. So just wanted to let that be known, and if that turns out to be the case, would love to have you come back and see what the council's thinking or what the committee's thinking in terms of priority of the 6 items. So.
Okay, I do have one question. I'm curious as to, as you all did research nationally or maybe regionally to figure out how to structure this RFP, did you find that other departments that are similar in size to Minneapolis, that they do this kind of thing regularly, or that this is the kind of thing that they wait to do until their council members ask them to do it, or is this sort of something that's not very common, or something that is common that's built into, some, I don't know if it would be like union contracts or the city's charter, but just trying to get a sense of like how common of a practice this is in the industry per se, or in the body of work of policing.
Yeah. Councilmember Cano, it's a good question. I would say that our impressions are it is not something that is done regularly for the same department every few years, that these studies are done pursuant to either an elected official request or a major event in a community, or frankly, if there are either changes in budgetary action, and that could be an expansion of budget, or it could be a reduction in budget. Certainly any large department in the city, whether it's public works or running the convention center, we hire people to manage those, and we rely on their expertise and their team's expertise to staff appropriately. So, but I think the discussion we had early on, and certainly had some discussions with Councilmember Fletcher about this, that some of the value of this study will be to highlight those metrics that are out there that I think everyone will feel like somehow this should be a formula. The number of sworn officers should be X per whatever thousand that we're looking at. I think the goal here is to provide more depth to some of that analysis to know, as just as you all as council and as certainly as police leadership has highlighted, is how policing is done today is very different than even it was done 5 years ago. And so I think this study, what I'm getting to is what I said earlier, is going to be less formulaic in the sense of driving, and you will see some studies around the country that are very formula driven, a big spreadsheet that just takes a variety of socioeconomic factors and plugs them in and says, here's your perfect staffing for all the different parts of your police department. We do see this as a learning opportunity for the enterprise, learning from other places that have undergone similar studies, learning in just the discussion internally among all of us as to what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. So I see it more like a strategic plan in the same way that we have a transportation action plan, in the same way that we have a comprehensive plan, that we do this periodically that will then set some of the goals over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. Okay, looks like we are out of questions for this item. And now that we are a quorum, we're going to go back to the beginning of the agenda and just go ahead and adopt the agenda. So all those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye. Aye. All those in favor, I'm going to go ahead and move forward the receive and file of the public comment, as we already had 2 folks share their public comment with us this morning. So all those in favor of receiving and filing public comment this morning, please say aye. Aye. And now we have the consent item. And so I will go ahead and move forward items 2, 3, 4, and 6. And we will go ahead and pull item number 5 out for discussion. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. And I will now give the floor to my colleague, Councilmember Fletcher, on item number 5.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to move that we delay this by a cycle, and I just want to articulate a little bit about why. I'm actually not singling out MPD. This is something I've been doing with IT and a bunch of other departments as they bring non-disclosure agreements through. Procedurally, when we go to closed session as a council, we have to articulate why we're going to closed session. What's the information we're talking about that it's appropriate to not have out in the public square. And I think it's very important for us that we're being transparent and that we get in the practice when we're agreeing to not disclose something, that we articulate a reason why. And I actually think there probably are articulable reasons why. In this case, it makes sense. I think if you're doing after-action reviews of how we gathered evidence, some people's publicly identifiable information, the person being charged, that's public, but some of the witnesses or informants might not be public, and there might be reasons that we need to shield that data. But we should articulate that we have a rationale. And so I want us to get in the practice of that, and I've spoken with staff in advance of this, so we're not taking anybody by surprise, and just want to ask this to move a cycle so that it can come back with a clearer RCA, so that when everybody's looking this up in LIMS and trying to understand the action that the council's taking, we're being clear with everybody about how we're protecting people's data and what data we're protecting, so that people don't have to be suspicious that we're protecting things that ought to be public, and they can feel comfortable with this. And I'll say this is, one of the important questions that a lot of us have been wrestling with, is how do we balance data privacy and transparency? And I'll just take this opportunity as well to foreshadow that next week is National Data Privacy Day, and I'm expecting to be rolling out new data privacy principles that we've got a new draft of. So my colleagues in the public can look forward to that next week as well. So we do take privacy seriously, and we want to make that one of the principles that we operate on. And also take public transparency very seriously, and want to balance those things. So happy to work with staff if they want to get some feedback on making sure that we're articulating some clear principles about why we would sign an NDA. And in general, want to discourage us from signing NDAs unless there really is a good reason, because we do want to keep as much information out in the public and available to everyone as possible.
Wonderful. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Connell. I'm just trying to understand, is the goal to identify what may be sort of, I guess, concealed, if you will, or more information? I'm not sure what the goal would be.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Jenkins. Yeah, I think it's important for us that as a default posture in our city, data is public, and the things that we do are public. And when we're going to close information off, when we're going to not reveal things that we're doing, there should be a rationale either in state law, which in many cases is why we don't reveal data, or we should be sharing with the public why we're protecting data. And so I just think it's a good practice for us to get into. The RCA isn't clear about what what the information exchange is and what information we're talking about. And I think that that leaves us vulnerable to people feeling suspicious that we're hiding something that might just be embarrassing to us or that we might just not want to share, as opposed to having a clear reason that there's personally identifiable information about people that we need to keep private, for legitimate reasons.
Alrighty. So we have a motion before us made by Councilmember Fletcher to go ahead and delay this item number 5, for a cycle. And all those in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. And that moves forward. Now, our last item of business here is just to officially receive and file the report from our city coordinator and staff on the MPD staffing and efficiency study update. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And without further business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.